Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. Marshall Fant, welcome back to GFA Missions Podcast Reach Church. So glad to have you joining us with us again, whether you're joined by audio or video or both. So glad to have you back. Appreciate GFA and their commitment to put these podcasts out. And again, as we are approaching different topics, today's message is one a little bit different. I really think it's just a way, not the way, but a way I think the church can better serve pastors and their families. So I want to welcome Charles Smith. Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so Charles has served at Harvest Baptist, which is my home church where we're now for years upon years. He served in many, many capacities, but he's also served as chairman of the deacons. And so as the topic of this podcast, really, so the position that we kind of created, I want to give the background and why I think it should be used. And we had a position called deacon in charge of pastoral relations. And it's a way a deacon and his wife can come on and support the pastor and his wife. And this podcast is not in response to a pastor or pastors over recent months making some very unwise and foolish decisions, sinful decision. But this has really been going over many years. And as I go into churches and help churches, this is a something we talk about a lot. So Charles volunteered to be, to allow me to interview him from how this works on the deacon side and how he can support pastor and his family through the local church. And Charles, I just want to give you some statistics here. So I have a friend that spent this, the last months really counseling pastors and their wives. And these were his stats. I asked him to keep stats. So discouragement and burnout, 41% of the people he talked to, pastors, were facing discouragement and burnout. 25% he counted on leaving to take another ministry or transitioning, 25% time management, 19% church conflict with leadership or others. Marriage, 15%, family, children, 14%, bitterness and hurts in ministry, 8%. Retirement 5%, and those pastors just feeling inadequate with 3%. So the topic is, okay, when a pastor or his wife, they're facing adversity in ministry, who do they go to within the church? And so the purpose of this is the way it started with me as a church replanter, just a little history. I found myself working 7 days a week, all day, every day. And I had to come up with some way. I knew I needed accountability for my time. And so years ago, here at Harvest, where Charles serves as chairman of the deacons, I went to our chairman and I said, would you hold me accountable for time management to where I'm taking a day off? And he agreed to. So as that progressed, and as I realized, okay, this can be, and I realized he wanted to do all he could to support our family. So really, it ended up being a weekly accountability sheet that we'll talk through. But, so several things with that. And again, with the chairman of our deacons serving in this role. And the reason, Charles, I chose a chairman of the deacons was because, number one, he is biblically qualified by our church, voted on by the church. Number two, he's been voted on by the deacons to be a man trustworthy to lead that office. And I knew as a man that I should be able to have a great working relationship with him. So as we talk about this, Charles, under the umbrella. So when you entered the role, okay, when you became chairman or when you took on this role of, being in charge of pastoral relations, what were your first thoughts as this was given to you?
If I can give you a little bit of an expansive answer.
Sure, absolutely.
I think one thing for congregations to really understand came out of your stats, that 40% burn out. Or, we see the newspapers and we hear the really bad events that happen. Mm-hmm. But most of most of the folks that leave the ministry or go somewhere else are burned out.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really get that.
Good
Um,
point.
but to your point, coming into the role specifically in as the deacon over pastoral relations, I at least got to see the running of that a little bit from the sidelines.
Okay.
So I have a large family that goes from from 35 down to 12. And so years and years and years, I pushed back on being a deacon, period, because it was like my children are too young. Then my wife finally said, "You're going to be 70 before you get everybody out the door. So it's time to go." So then I became a deacon, and I got to see a very godly man as the chair for many years and see some of the load that he took.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really know all of that load until you take that role.
Right.
So I came into it thinking I kind of knew what was going to be there. But as you well know, if you're the chair, at least in our church, if you're the chair, you're the one person who knows just about everything that's going on.
Yeah.
You need to know that it's confidential.
Mm-hmm.
When confidentiality needs to be broken because of to do everything right.
Right.
But that's a rarity. So coming into the role, I didn't know what I didn't know, which was how much a pastor really has on his shoulders. So much of the counseling that happens that no one knows about, no one needs to know about.
Right.
But understanding the load that pastor has. So, to your question about using the accountability, my biggest concern, even as I came in, was similar to my work experience. I worried most about good people burning out.
Mm.
So for the accountability sheet each week, my eyes first went to, what does energy look like? Are they taking time off? Are they having time with the family? Because that was my biggest concern. That may not sound very spiritual. I think red flags come up if the
Sure.
pastor's not where he needs to be spiritually. So my first look, it's not that I ignored those, but my first look was, how hard is this man burning?
Yeah. All right. So as a deacon, and again, I've known your family a long time. So, you and your wife walk with the Lord, but taking on the role of pastoral relations. Okay. I know you said you didn't know what you didn't know, and I understand that's a great answer. I understand that. But also, if you're talking to another deacon and he's fearful, then wait a minute, I don't know if I can bear this, Galatians 6:1, bear another one's burden like this. How would you encourage him to do so? Because you mentioned the guard for burnout, but there are going to be men when they hear this, they're going to hesitate. And I think you also hesitated, right? Is that what I heard you say? I mean, you walked into it with some, I'll say fear.
I don't know that I walked into it fearful or hesitating. It's like my eyes were opened more as I walked through the door.
Okay. All right.
Just to understand the depth of the load that the pastor often has on his shoulders.
Okay.
That even not just a casual observer wouldn't see, but most of the men on the deacon board don't see that depth because they don't have an ear to everything the pastor's engaged in, which is for his own protection as well. That's
sure.
I don't know if all churches do it that way, but at Harvest, anything significant going down, the chair knows about it to make sure he's got the pastor's back, to make sure that that the pastor doesn't want to walk into this and no one know what was going on.
Yeah.
And no one be able to tap him on the shoulder and go, time out, or yeah, you're right, it's hard, you need to keep going.
Yeah, and what Charles is talking about, so our policy is that especially if you started something in a Galatians 6:1 or Matthew 18, where you have someone in the church in a unrepentant sin, and you go to them to start dealing with it, our policy as well is let the chairman know, so he's aware, as well as there's accountability to make sure the process has started. So if anyone in the church questions why this wasn't being dealt with, right? So what I'm saying is what Charles is saying there is in their role, the way it works is he's brought into at the beginning level of a lot of potential conflict.
Yeah.
And burdens. Okay. All right. So let me go through. All right. So let's go back. So let's start. And you mentioned it quickly. So I want to start down the road of an accountability sheet. Okay. So I want to think through why. So as I did this, I'm going to tell you why I did, because the accountability sheet affects all areas of my life, not just my thoughts or, lust or time, but every area: family, ministry, personal time off, finances, possible unresolved conflict, commitments in the local church. So I think the primary, Charles, in my perspective as a pastor, the reason I did it and send you a copy was it gave a deposit of trust in my wife's heart. Okay. So I thought this, number one, yes, it's a ministry to me, but really it's a ministry that the chairman of the deacons or the chairman of the, pastoral relations person is really performing for my wife, because as she sees me send in my accountability sheet, I always copied her in on it. And I think the primary benefit was she knew I had some accountability there and some checks and balances, as you were saying.
Yeah. I think it's important that the wife is copied.
Yeah.
Because I can have a perspective of my own, and my wife will very quickly say, "Oh, Charles, your perspective is not reality."
Yeah.
Sorry.
And let me say this at this point, we can talk about it later. At the same time, the way it's set up is at any point the pastor's wife has a concern, or associate pastor's wife, or whoever has a concern, the deacon in charge of pastoral relations is that person to go to. So there is always a check for the staff's wives as well as others on staff. And so that's a ministry not only Charles would have, but also Charles and his wife. And I cannot tell you what a great benefit that is. But so the primary benefit would be my wife has someone she could go to, and she is seeing what I'm turning in. The secondary benefit, Charles, I think, is that is I'm demonstrating submission one to another in this area. I think it's clearly demonstrated that you think of the centurion who went to Christ in Matthew 8 and said, "Would you heal my servant?" And he said, "Well, you don't even have to come, Lord, just say it." And what did Christ say about him? He marveled. "Surely I say to you, I've not found such great faith even in Israel." So that is an example of a man living under authority. And so I'm saying, even though we're probably, so I'm saying this is practicing the one another. So, your thoughts on that? Any thoughts on that, Charles?
Yeah, I think it's really, one, there has to be a great amount of trust between the chair and the pastor and their families, or else it all breaks down, because it's got to be real. And the other thing around that is, I think it's a good thing to have someone you're accountable to, that each week I'm going to check in, I'm going to tell you how I did. Could you lie on it? Yes, you could.
Sure.
But then you've got other bigger problems. But just it being front and center, I didn't take a day off this week. Charles is going to know that, and he's going to poke me on it. Or I just had no energy for the week in front of me, or I didn't do my devotions this week. To know that you're going to have to tell someone that at the end of the week, I think helps us in our weaker moments to suck it up and do what we got to do.
Good. Now, you mentioned something that I was going to address later, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. So again, in your position as a deacon working with, in this case now, pastoral staff, okay, you mentioned the word trust. So Charles, if as a deacon and someone comes to you and says, "Okay, I don't think my pastor trusts me," deacon to deacon, church leader to church leader, what would you tell that man? How can a man reach out and gain the trust of his pastor?
So someone someone in the congregation comes up to me and says that?
No. If somebody listens to this podcast, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And they're thinking about doing, a deacon in charge of pastoral relations. And this guy says, "But I don't think the pastor trusts me." What would be some things that deacon could do to open up the relationship? Because you've had great relationship with me and all the other pastoral staff. Okay. But that took time.
Yes.
Okay. And so is there something a deacon could do to gain trust of his pastor to have this kind of ministry? And that may be a loaded question. You may not even be able to answer that. I don't know.
No, I
It's
think
a hypothetical.
I think part of the answer is, and this just may be me. The first thing would be sit down and have that put it on the table.
Good.
Is there a trust? How can I improve that? How can I help you get there? So I'm assuming something, but I assume it's really challenging for a pastor and his wife. They're humans just like everybody else. They're going to have challenges just like everybody else. But their challenges impact the whole church.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a deep trust to go beyond just surface level. Yeah, everything's okay. I did my devotions. I took my day off. If there's deeper things rumbling, you've got to establish that deep trust. Some of that is simply time.
Yeah.
And some of that may just be a really frank conversation about, is there a deep level of trust, and how could I deepen that for you, Pastor so-and-so?
Yeah, that's very well said. Thank you. Very well said. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. That was still on the why. So I think another reason why a pastor should consider this is those he's discipling. Okay. Every pastor should be discipling others. So, as those I'm discipling, we could exchange accountability sheets. And, I can say, hey, this is what I do with Charles each week. How about you fill one out and send it to me, and I'll send you mine. So I think it's a pattern here that as we follow Christ, then others can follow us as well. And I think for those listeners, if you want other reasons to do an accountability sheet, the book by Heath Lambert, Finally Free, I think it's chapter 3. Don't quote me on that. You'd have to look it up. But he has a whole list of great reasons to use accountability sheets, because accountability sheets really can help. Accountability partner can help you while you're going through something and just not report after, so that's another advantage. Okay, let's talk about the how, because how does this really work? All right, so and again, I'm gonna lay it out, and then Charles, I want you to walk through some of the questions we use and talk through it. So, number one, the how to, this is one way you can work it. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. This is simply one way, is you have an agreed upon accountability sheet. So Charles may say, hey, how about let's adding this question? And I may say, hey, is this question really important? So agreed by I think 3 people, the pastor's wife, and someone filling the role of Charles, right? The deacon in charge of pastoral relations. It should be, the way I see it, the way it's done, Charles, is emailed to you once a week, right? So there'll be a weekly accountability. And again, you copying your wife in on this, and therefore she knows what I'm reporting. And I think also when you go through this, another benefit to this is then it gives Charles, or the deacon in charge of this, or with this responsibility is probably a better way to put it. It gives you a platform to sit down and talk through something, right? It opens the door for that. So, Charles, as I go through these questions that are on accountability sheet, I'm gonna go through a few, and I want you, as we do them, say, okay, these are the red flags you mentioned earlier. These are the things I'm really watching for. You said burnout. Time off. But some things that the first question, and these are on us, and I'll be happy to post this on the show notes. But I think we had a scale here, several questions. Like number 1, need help, all the way to number 9, we're doing good. Things like not consisting in personal devotions, you're battling ungodly thoughts, unbelief, bitterness, resentments, lust, pride, jealousy, covetous, racism, etc. By the way, these sheets are not original with me. I go into every accountability sheet I can find and put these in there. Number 3, and Charles mentioned this, your energy for the week ahead. And then number 4, your feelings of effectiveness in your pastoral role. So those are on scales of 1 to 9. So Charles, comment on those. What would you be looking for? What just run with that.
So there's a couple things I'm looking for. Anything that's like 4 and below is going to catch my eye. The other thing I tend to look at is if it's always starts to come into a set range. Like it's always between these 2 numbers.
Yeah.
I don't think we as humans really land always between those 2 numbers. So that makes me worry a little bit. Like, is this becoming rote? Because it really needs to be real, or else there's no reason to do this. I'm happy when I see things high, 8 and 9. Um, but realistically, people are living in that
Yeah.
6 to 8 zone most of the time. So those are a couple things I look at just to check, is the data real? Like, if it's always the same number, I'm concerned about it. If it's a really low number, I'm going to check in, just see how things are doing.
Is that usually with a phone call or text or email? How do you?
I prefer face to face.
Okay.
So a lot of times I'll do a text with, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes?" when I'm at the church and I know they're going to be at the church, preferably not Sunday or Wednesday, because the pastors are busy those days.
Right.
And I haven't really seen the one I worry about, which is it just starts to look rote, but that would be something that would catch my eye.
Good point. All right. So let me ask you this. You've talked, and again, you on the stats, it showed burnout. So the way this sheet is laid out, there are two questions, and I want to explain what they are. Number one, it says weekly modules invested. Okay. And again, this was not with me, but we divided every day into 3 modules. Module 1, morning; number 2, afternoon; number 3, evening. So every day has 3 modules. Therefore, you have 21 modules in a week. Okay. So a question asked would be weekly modules invested. So that would be doing the work of the ministry through the church. And the next question would be, did you take a day off this past week of 3 consecutive modules? So the like a day off in our world, Charles, what you're looking at could be an afternoon, evening, and morning, or it could be morning, afternoon, evening. Okay, but 3 consecutive modules to where you are taking time off. All right, so weekly modules invested in taking time off in a week. Charles, this is probably the number one area that most people struggle with from what we saw. So please address those. How do you address those with men?
I'm still working on the whole module thing, Pastor, to be quite honest. I'm looking for, you had 24 hours that you were off.
Yeah.
I mean, most people that aren't in the ministry usually get 2 days. You guys rarely got 2 days. It's usually 1 day. And the challenges of ministry is you're there a lot of times in the evening, or there's a Bible study one night that's not Sunday or Wednesday.
Yeah.
So, or if you're the youth pastor, that can really eat into your non-standard daytime work hours. So I really think it's important that there's at least those 3 modules together, but I'm really looking for, did you take a 24-hour, like a day where you didn't do work?
Okay.
And I think that's a challenge for the pastors as well. There's 3 on staff right now. I've never at Harvest had to worry about a pastor who was slack and didn't really pull their weight.
Right.
So I'm always tilting towards, are you taking enough time off? I don't want you to be 20 years into the ministry and you look back and you think you've lost your kids because you didn't spend time with them.
Yeah.
Every man's going to have to make his own choice. So I'm not trying to hang that on someone whose children have gone a different way. But I want to make sure they've got time to invest in their own families and not just the larger church family.
All right. So with that, Charles, I mean, could this be better worded if somebody's doing their own survey sheet? Would you just recommend, did you take 24 hours off? Would that be a good way to word it, Charles?
I would like that. I mean, I think you can kind of tweak it for what works best for your particular environment.
Yeah.
But to me, if you didn't have a full 24, like, sidebar, I was in IT forever, and many of those years I wore a pager. I was off, but anytime that pager went off, it didn't matter what was going on with the family. I was out of there, and pastors live that life all the time. So I'm looking for, did you have a full day off?
Good. That's a good way to word it. Okay. So all right, now here's what I want to do. I want to go back and forth. So as we go through these next questions, okay, you can comment or not and just say, so here are the questions that we have chosen to use. Next one, did you work on the church memory verse this week? So our entire church has memory verses. So the pastor, did you work on it? Yes or no? Have I communicated with a man or woman this past week that could be viewed as compromising? Yes or no?
If I can jump in on that one, I think that's important because a lot of times you may stumble into an event, that
Yes.
you just had to deal with it as it came, and nothing was done wrong from your perspective into that event, but to let someone else know that it happened.
Yep.
I think that takes care of a whole lot of potential pain later, just to say, here's what happened. Here was the situation. Here's how it turned out.
And I laugh. I start laughing because, again, this was on my sheet one week, and I won't go into the details, but I got cornered in my office after a Sunday night meeting by a woman visitor in the church who probably didn't have the best reputation in the world. Okay. And I'm sitting there, how do I get out of this? And because I knew, okay, because this is and it was in the office in the church, but by God's grace, my wife came along and rescued me. Okay. But these are things that I think protect us. Yeah, Charles, this is what happened. I didn't know what to do,
And that goes beyond the pastors. So my event was, I was in Pennsylvania on work, eating at a restaurant by myself at night, and a female came in from work and joined me. It's like,
what do you do? Yeah.
So as soon as that dinner was over, it's like, Heather, here's what happened at dinner, and here's what went on. And you just take care of it up front, because you can't avoid every one of those.
Amen. Amen. So next one, have any of my financial dealings failed to be filled with integrity? And have I viewed any sexually explicit material? All these are yes or no, by the way.
Yeah. I think all those really go to where we live in this society.
Yeah.
That you need to be able to say, here's what went down this week.
Yeah.
And again, to know that you're going to have to say it is such a positive peer pressure event, for the lack of a better way to say that.
No, that's a great way to say it. And again, the next one goes back to we've already talked about. Have I neglected to give appropriate time to my family? Now here's one, Charles, that I really like. Are there any personal struggles, stresses, or temptations that you would like to discuss with someone? See, to me, that was a way I could reach out, and I circle yes. You got any comments on that one?
If you're the one reading it, you better pick up on that one, and just circle back with what's going on.
Yeah.
And that goes also to, you've got to have a deep trust that I can talk to the person in charge of pastoral staff and know that I can talk about tough things. Now, there's a boundary line where if something significant happened, is that a bigger impact that cannot stay between the two? But that's more the rarity.
Right. Yeah.
They've got to know that you've appropriately spiritually have their back, that you're watching out for them, not that you'll cover their sin, but that you're watching out for them and you're working in their best interest.
All right. Which now, something I didn't say, which what you just said reminded me. So there is a commitment on your part that you will read these sheets.
Yes.
When you're in this role. So, I mean, there is a commitment, and we didn't say that in the beginning, but that is something that a man cannot take over this position and then not read the sheets.
Because that it's useless.
I got it.
It's paperwork. Who cares?
Yep. Right. Okay. And then again, we have a couple more with a scale from 1 to 9. How is your family joy and harmony? And this one, the second one is this: assess your eating and exercise this past week.
Yeah, that pokes at all of us. See, a lot of times I get convicted myself reading your accountability sheets. Like, I need to get out there and hit the road.
So what would you do if that's constantly, and again, the scale on this, assessing your eating and exercise this week. So there's a scale from 1 to 9, 1 being unhealthy, 9 being healthy. What would you do? How would you love on your pastor if this is constantly coming out at a 2 or 3?
Yeah. And I think your key word there is constantly. If it's Thanksgiving week, I'm not going to pay too much attention to that one.
Right.
But if it's consistent, I'd approach them with, how can I help you with that?
Okay.
It's that personally is an area I've always been challenged in my life. And I know that when I don't eat right and I don't get out there and exercise, it impacts everything else that I do. I'm shorter with my family. I don't really feel as good. So to the answer to the question is just approach them like, what's going on? How's it going? Is it a time issue that's forcing you into that? And do we need to, how do we help?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. All right. Next questions, and then we're coming to the end for our listeners' sake. Next question was: did you present the gospel to someone this week? Yes or no? Did you hand out tracts as part of your normal work week? Yes or no? And that's just something that we think was important. Did you make an attempt to personally visit someone this week, harvest or non-harvest? And again, that's the accountability to get out of the office.
Right.
Right. Yes or no? And is there anything, the last question is this: is there anything you should have done this past week but did not do? Yes or no? And if so, what? Okay.
And I think just to wrap a lot of those questions up, again, I will take back to, I'll keep pounding on my one rock of, you can't be so busy that we don't really engage in what the ministry is, and the ministry is to people.
Yeah.
So if things are taking up all of the pastor's time, and those aren't ministry related to people, we need to take some of that load off of them.
Yeah.
And let him delegate more, but be out there face to face ministering to people, which is that's what the ministry is.
What the shepherd does, right?
Yes.
He needs to spend time with his sheep. Okay. And by the way, on this is a place to sign it. And again, as Charles said in the earlier, we've all done accountability with people that sign it and they're lying. Okay. But when you sign your name to it, at least there's an accountability factor there. Right. And again, you're building trust. All right. So, anything on that, anything else? And then we'll get into when we should do this, how, we've done the why and the how.
I just couldn't double down on trust enough. Because if I'm a pastor and a pastor's wife, that's the ministry that we are engaged in. That's what puts food on the table. So if I'm going to say there's some challenges inside the family, that's really bearing your soul to someone.
Yeah.
And what brings food in each day. So I think you really have to show that you care about them.
Yeah.
And that you can be there for them.
Yeah. And it may be even, I know one deacon who was kind of forced into this role, then recommended for the pastor's wife to go elsewhere to get help. But the point was the deacon knew it, and the deacon, even I think that church funded, so again, this is where there's got to be a relationship within the church. All right. So let's go to this, Charles, and we'll kind of wrap it up. So the question is then when? Okay. Now I'm going to tell you what I chose to do. You can comment on it, and other guys can choose how to do whatever they want to. I did this on Sunday mornings. For this, I did it once a week. First, it was a weekly thing, because you start talking about, did I take a day off this past week? Once you get beyond a week, in my world, it gets hard to really be accurate in your accountability. Okay. Others may be able to do that. I don't know. I chose Sunday mornings for this reason. So I would email mine to you on a Sunday morning. It would be on Sunday morning because I wanted to enter the pulpit with a clear conscience for God and man that day. I wanted you to be aware. I wanted my wife to be aware. And this was just a healthy way of having my heart as right as possible before the Lord and others, before the Lord's, before we enter that day. So any other comments on the when?
I think it should be weekly.
Okay.
If it stretches out beyond a week, not only is it hard to just remember everything, but if things aren't going well, you're just compounding the issue. Me personally, I would do it at the very first thing of my week or the very last thing of my week. And it becomes that, I'm not done until I get that event done. Sure.
And then you're looking for it about that day, right, Charles?
Yeah. Like if I've had to poke people, hey, you're a day or two late. And there's the challenge for the person in charge of pastoral relations. If you don't say anything and something hadn't showed up, they know you aren't watching. The whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
So, I won't hit you the first day afterwards, but a day or two after, 2 days after, it's like, is your sheet coming this week?
Nope.
So that people remember. But to your point, I would make sure if it was me, it'd be my first thing of the week or my last thing of the week.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. All right. So let me ask you this. You and I were talking, and you mentioned the possibility maybe, all right, so your wife's name's Heather, and you even mentioned it may be a healthy thing for Heather to get along with the pastor's wife and have a talk. You want to comment on that? That was something I had not thought of. I should have, but I thought it was a very good idea.
Again, there's got to be a massive trust level there.
Yeah.
But sometimes even if it's fairly even if it's not really deep, like,
Yeah.
hey, tell me your deepest woes and worries.
Yeah.
It can simply be, hey, check me in once a week or stopping by the house to bring them something, or there's usually interaction with the kids, but just to have that conversation. And the conversation may not be, how are things with you and pastor? It's just a regular conversation. And in those conversations, a lot of times you can find out how stressed out are people, how busy are people. And you can pick up on a lot there that can tell you, how healthy are things.
Another benefit, as I was thinking about, because this was something you brought up in our discussion preparing for this podcast, I think that also, even if you just do the low level, how are you, a cup of coffee, that also is preparing that if something does come up, then your wife's already had a conversation, so they know they can go back and forth with each other.
Yeah, and I think it's much less intimidating for my wife to go talk to one of the ladies than for me to go talk to one of the ladies.
Definitely on that one. Okay, so let me ask you this. You just mentioned if one becomes slack. So if somebody doesn't do it for a week or 2 weeks, is that are you going to have to sit down face to face with them at that point?
I would have it before 2 weeks for sure. It's like,
okay.
Out. I want.
All right. I'm just trying to give men that have never done this. I'm just trying to throw out questions to you that, so you would have it almost immediately then.
The week is not going to complete without, hey, let's resolve this.
Okay.
Or is there something bigger going on here that you haven't sent it to me?
All right. So a couple more questions as we wrap it up. Number one, the next one, not number one. So what would you do? And again, this is hypothetical because we have not, in my experience with you or other staff, I've not seen this happen. But what would your action path be if you doubted the honesty?
I'd be praying a whole lot before I did anything.
Right. But there's
if I doubted the honesty, I would first really make it a matter of prayer. I would have that conversation, but I would also be checking in with the spouse as well.
Yeah, there you go. And then if need be, and then if the spouse verifies, you have to bring another deacon in on this, right? Because you're yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I guess just in conclusion, other thoughts, ideas you have on this, what blessings did you not anticipate from something like this? And then what challenges to this ministry, because it is a ministry to the pastor and his wife and to the church. And so I guess what challenges came up that you may not have thought would be there?
So to me, that it was a pairing of challenge and an encouragement to me, which was really understanding the depth of the load the pastor carries. That even as a deacon on the board, but not the chair, I did not really get the depth of how much winds up on the pastor's shoulders. Emotional, spiritual, getting things done. It's a huge load. So that was a huge eye opener for me, and also helped me know how to pray for him better, how to help watch out for him better. Also how to rally the deacon group sometimes for things that weren't spoken, but probably were a need for the staff. So being able to be an advocate for them. And also, as you build that trust, and I'm going to the larger deacon board now, going a little bit away from the core idea here, is a good functioning deacon board is going to have the hard conversations.
Yes.
Or else it's not a good functioning board. Um, we aren't all monolithic in our thinking. We've got to work through things. And we should be working in each other's best interest, not to hide anything, but to fully voice the voice of the church.
Yeah.
So I went a little bit away from the accountability stuff there, but I think it plays to building that layer of trust.
No, it all works together. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a platform for a pastor and his wife to have support of the church. That's the whole purpose of this thing. And I'll tell you one blessing I had just from, again, I get to see this up close. Now, I mean, I'm just a member of the church. I'm not a deacon on pastoral staff. But when you got up in the last business meeting and it was budget time, and you plainly in the pastor's salaries were being discussed, you said very plain, you did not have to worry about the hours they worked. You would try to make sure, but the way you worded it, the congregation had no doubt these men were diligent about their labors. And I think that just spoke volumes of the relationship you've built with these men, because you see their accountability sheet each week. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's fair. And I think it's the flip side of the responsibility of the deacon who has that role.
Yeah.
If there's time, a quick story. I was going to a group of older ladies who were having a luncheon, and they had missed a business announcement on a Sunday evening. So they were asking me to expound upon it. And as I expounded upon it, I was talking about maybe we might have to go to 2 services. And one person said, well, why do they push back so hard against 2 services? In essence, they aren't that busy, are they? I said, time out. They are very busy, and they aren't the ones who push back. It's, you now have to have double the volunteers. So it was to really help people understand the load the pastors have. And most of the times when something's not getting done, it's because the church needs to step up and members need to pull their fair share.
Amen. Amen. All right. Let me just say this. For those who are listening and you're considering a deacon in charge of pastoral relations, I just want to encourage you as a pastor, what a blessing it is to develop a relationship. And Charles wasn't the only one. We had several deacon chairs that I work with. And I thank you for your ministry, because I am convinced with the churches I'm in that if godly men, the church belongs to Christ. It doesn't belong to the pastor. It doesn't belong to the deacons. And this is a tremendous ministry for the health of the church. So, Charles, thank you for your ministry. And I trust other men will be listening and maybe be willing to take on this role. All right. So any closing comments, Charles?
Last comment.
Sure.
I think it goes against the grain of everything that is American society for me to say, I'm going to give you an accountability sheet every week. It's just like, well, wait, time out. We're independent people. But as Christians, we're called to be an open book.
Yeah.
And when we don't want to open the book, that usually points to things I need to get right with God.
Yeah.
So I just encourage folks that don't look at it. You're taking away my independence. It's like Christ was an open book. We should be an open book.
Yeah.
And that helps make me more like him in the long run.
And I think if we are honest as pastors, we realize that if we lose our wife and our family, we have lost our ministry. And I think this is the guardrails on the highway to make sure we stay. And again, again, I just thank you for you and Heather and the ministry you have to the pastoral staff at Harvest. And I pray other pastors and other deacons, as you're listening to this, you will take up the challenge to have someone fill this role. And again, you can get in touch with me, mfant@gfamissions.org. Be happy to explain it to you. I can then put you in touch with Charles, and he'd be willing to talk to you. And however we can help, want to be a blessing. So, Charles, thank you so much for your time today. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate your investment in other churches. Okay, Marshall Fant with GFA Missions. Again, to get any questions from me, mfant@gfamissions.org. Contact us. If you're supporting GFA missionaries, thank you. If you're looking for good missionaries to support, contact us, and we'll be happy to send you some names, and you can interview those that may need some support.
You're listening to Rechurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.